So, good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Steering Committee of the Center for World Networking, I want to welcome you all to this evening of our winter fundraiser event in collaboration with our friends at Afghan Friends Network. My name is Celia Alvarez, as many of you know, some of you may not, and I'm going to be your host this evening, accompanied by Sylvia Sterlich and Bhavananda Latke, who will be our Zoom hosts. I'm just going to turn it over to Sylvia for a second so she can just give us some guidelines for the protocol this evening regarding Zoom.
Yes, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Just a few reminders about staying muted throughout the presentation, and there will be time at the end of the presentation for your questions. So if you want to raise your hands or just unmute yourself. So that's what I had to say. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Sylvia. And I was going to say, for those of you who are new to us, but it looks like almost everybody here is not new, but I will say anyway. We at the Center for World Networking, we're a volunteer-led community-based organization. It started in the mid-'80s under the guidance of our spiritual teacher, Swami Sri Yukteswar, who was channeled monthly by Teresa Stolaroff. And the center is located in Santa Cruz, California. And our focus is being an organization that honors all paths to wholeness. And in acknowledging all those paths, we want to recognize our common ground. So we provide opportunities for networking and connection through our Monday night events, our e-list, and our network newsletter. Contact information for any of these venues can be found in our newsletter on the website. And this evening, we're hosting a fundraising event in support of the educators in Afghanistan. And this event is part of our commitment as an organization to support individuals and communities locally and globally. We first have a presentation from our guests, and then that'll be followed by an opportunity for everybody to ask questions and to be able to donate to the fundraiser. So tonight, I'm really so pleased and honored to share with you, the new relationship and partnership that we've started with Afghan Friends Network, a Bay Area nonprofit that has helped over 4,300 girls and 1,000 boys in Afghanistan and 350 adult women over the last 15 years get educated and continues to support those teachers to this day. I have the pleasure of introducing you to Hamaida Hilsai and John Bortner. Hamaida is the co-founder of Afghan Friends Network, and John is the co-chair. Maybe we can put John up too. Yeah. There he is. Yay. Okay. Hamaida is a writer, speaker, and Afghan cultural consultant. She focuses on projects that bring positive social change. She's, as I said, the co-founder of Afghan Friends Network, and she instituted the sister city relationship between Hayward, California, and Ghazni, Afghanistan. For the past 17 years, Hamaida has done extensive work to improve education for girls, boys, and women in the province of Ghazni. She was born and raised in Kabul, Afghanistan, but her family led the country after the Russian invasion in 1979, and they made their way to the Bay Area as their new home. Hamaida writes about Afghan people and culture on her blog called The Afghan Culture Unveiled, and we will drop that link into the chat for you all. John is a high-tech marketing professional who began his career as an art museum professional. He is the longest serving board member on the Afghan Friends Network and currently their board chair. His dedication to Afghan students and their educators was deepened during his visit to Afghanistan. There he saw the challenges they both faced in their zeal for an education. John continues to advocate for Afghans while their country is in turmoil and their access to education, and as their access to education has mostly, as we all know, ended, he believes Afghans deserve an education and a chance for a career and a good life. So welcome, Hamaida and John, and I'm going to turn the floor over to you this evening.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
going to start sharing.
Yeah, I'll talk while John sets up our slides. I wanted to thank Celia and Sylvia and Bhavananda for being here tonight and making this an enjoyable experience for us. But I also want to thank Celia and Sylvia for meeting with us, for vetting our organization, and for recommending us for this partnership. We're really surprised, honored, and grateful for this opportunity. John, you want to just make that into a slide? Yeah, great. I'm Humaira Gilzai. I'm calling or I'm zooming in from the land of the Ramaytush Ohlone, which is colonially known as San Francisco. But before I start my presentation, I want to acknowledge the suffering and pain and destruction that's happening in the Ukraine right now. And I thought maybe we can just take a moment of silence for the people of Ukraine right now. So, like I said, we're really, really grateful to be here with you all tonight, and so appreciative that you're all here watching us speak as opposed to watching your favorite show or having a big meal with your family members. I am a refugee that immigrated to the US in 1980, where there was the first wave of Afghan refugees that came to the United States. I grew up in the Bay Area, and a lot of us who came here as young people have now become part of our communities in the Bay Area. There are doctors, writers, bloggers, tech professionals who were all Afghans who immigrated. This is just a reminder that, you know, our nation is always growing and changing, and immigrants are part of that. And now there's the second large wave of Afghan refugees that are coming to the US. And it's really important to know that in that 10 or 15 years, they're going to be the doctors, nurses, high-tech professionals and such. But what we're going to talk about tonight is what is happening in Afghanistan. So next slide, John. And we're specifically going to talk about Afghan Friends Network, an organization that I co-founded in 2002 in the Bay Area, shortly after the US invaded Afghanistan. Our goal was to really identify what are some ways that we could help the Afghan people. And we really decided to go in the rural area as opposed to staying in Kabul. So we work primarily in Ghazni, Afghanistan, which is actually not that far from Kabul. It's 90 kilometers, but when you leave Kabul and get to Ghazni, you feel like you're worlds away. And that's what's so interesting about Afghanistan, where you can be in the middle of a bustling city and then you just drive an hour or two and it's a completely different world. We've kept the Afghan Friends Network a grassroots organization because we did not feel that it was our mission was not aligned with going after government money or having multi-layers of people here that we had to pay salaries to, and then have very limited amount of the money go to Afghanistan. Up until now, John, myself, and the rest of our board have all been volunteers, and we don't have any staff in the United States. We have no overhead. And we've always sent majority of what we raise to Afghanistan. Next slide, please. So as I said, I came to the US when maybe I didn't mention my age earlier, but I was 11 years old. And the first time I went back to Afghanistan, after immigrating was in 2006. And this is the house that I lived in when we left Afghanistan. And for me, it was a very, very emotional trip because I got to see Afghanistan after so many years. And some of the things in my house really hadn't changed that much. And that's me standing in front of it. Clearly, that was not a very good shot. I guess I wasn't Instagram ready at that time, but I was really grateful because I was able to travel with John and another AFN board member and a couple of volunteers, and I experienced the country with their support. And because I was really concerned about how emotional it would be to go back and see my home and meet the Afghan people and whether they would accept me or not. Next slide. So this was what Kabul looked like in 2006. You get an aerial view of the city. It doesn't look very different than a lot of cities that you might see pictures of, in overseas. We were up in the Intercontinental Hotel and had this like panoramic view of the city. So we were there in May, so the weather was really beautiful. Or was it April? Yeah, April. Next slide, please. And one of the concerns I had when I was there is like, will the Afghans think I'm a traitor or somebody, a fair weather Afghan who left when the country was in war and has come back now? But everywhere we went, we had these amazing smiles. The kids were just super friendly. This was on top of a hill where we like overlooked over the valley, and a lot of kids were doing kite flying. So I do have to say John was way more popular than me because he has blonde hair. So everybody was excited to stop and talk to him. But this kind of gives you a nice view of the Afghan people and how joyful and welcoming they were despite so many years of war. Next slide, please. So this was actually Balai Sar, which is archaeological site and a fortress that's on top, kind of like on a hill above the city. And when it was originally built, and I'm not sure what century it was used as a lookout point to see for enemies that are coming into the city. For me, this was, seeing Kabul after so many years was just so overwhelming because I kept anticipating it has changed. Well, I had changed a lot. But then the essence of the city was still there. The mountains were still there as, we had left them. Some of the buildings were there. And I started recognizing a lot of the streets and such. And I found that really heartening and made me realize how, despite the fact we are away from a place or land, you still have your deep connections with it. Next slide, please. So this brings me to our delegation. That delegation may not be the right word, but I'm here in the forefront with my sunglasses on, and then the woman with the brown headscarf is Susan Omak. She was a part of the AFN board for a long time as well. The two women in the front were volunteer teachers who traveled with us and did teacher training. And then you see John in the background. The rest of the folks who were there were our host, who was the governor of Ghazi's staff and security guards and such. This is a great segue to allow John to talk about why he got interested in Afghanistan and what has kept him engaged in Afghan Friends Network. So John, passing it on to you.
Thank you, Humaira. So I do want to point out that I am not frowning. I'm looking into the sun. I wasn't smart enough to have my sunglasses on like Humaira. So this trip was really special. It was an honor to go to Afghanistan with Hamira for her first visit back to her home, and so special to experience Kabul and her house and other sites that were so familiar to her. But I had already been on the board for, I think, 2 years, and had been a donor. I'd gone to events. I had received emails before I joined the board. So I was very, very much committed and really wanted to help the Afghans. But being there and being in Ghazni, but as well as in Kabul, and seeing what the teachers did to educate their students, including in Ghazni, long dusty walks or muddy walks or snowy walks in the winter. We were there at the beginning of April, and the students doing the same thing. And rather, it's not the type of classrooms we're used to in the Bay Area. So that just solidified my dedication to the program. And this is where we first got engaged with the director of our programs, and which leads me, okay.
You muted yourself, John.
So we had been doing education programs, primarily it was teacher training. So the teachers wanted to become better teachers. And so those two volunteers you saw were there teaching teachers how to teach and be more engaging. But it was very early 2007, or it might have been the very end of 2006, the head of education for the entire province of Ghazni, a woman, came to us with a proposal. And was basically a learning center, which would supplement the education that middle school and high school girls weren't getting in the classroom. And that's because there's a shortage of teachers and a shortage of actual physical school buildings. So the school day was cut in half. And so at the end of the school year, the students weren't getting their full curriculum. And so by the time they're ready to take what is the college entrance exam, which determines whether they go to school and where they go to school, they weren't passing because they were missing half of the curriculum. So she proposed this idea, and we really liked it. We liked that it was coming to us from Afghanistan, as opposed to us saying, here's what we think you should do. But we did check it, and we checked with some folks, and I emailed with Hamira's cousin, who said that her brother paid for her to attend one of these extended learning centers in Kabul, and she felt that was the only reason she got in to college, and she came from a family who could afford to support it. So we opened the first one in June of 2007, and the teachers followed the official Afghan curriculum and covering math, science, and English, and it just started with one for girls. Okay, I'm trying to change the slide. There. So we ended up opening a second location for girls, and then some of the mothers came and said, hey, what about us? What, Afghanistan has a very high illiteracy rate, and especially so for women. And so they were asking, is there something you can do for us? So we opened the first women's literacy program, adult women's literacy. That could include teenage girls who didn't want to sit with a bunch of 6-year-olds in the elementary school when they're 15 and 16. So we opened that, and then the girls actually said, what about something for the boys? These would be their brothers, their cousins, potential husbands. And so we looked at that. So we opened one for the boys. So at this point, we had 2 girl KLCs, 1 boy KLC, and 2 adult women's literacy programs. We thought it was great that the girls really wanted the males in the community to be educated, and that the parents were supporting this. So it's important to recognize that none of the girls could have gone to this school, this extended learning center, without their father's support or the male head of the family. One thing's, as Myra said, we have no overhead, no salaries, no equipment. We also have no buildings. So all of our learning centers, the horizontal learning centers, were in rented buildings. And we were also therefore putting money back into the community by funding the rent, but we didn't have building maintenance and overhead. And that huge problem of, how do you build something or maintain something? As the programs developed, we found that we need to add some more classes. So we did add what is a class studying for the college entrance exam. That's called the Concours, or sometimes Concord. And that allowed our students to do much better on the exam. So that does determine if you go to university, but it also determines which university you go to and what you study. So after our second year, we had on average over a 90% passing rate for the Concours exam. Our last year, I believe it was 93% of all of our students who took it passed. But that didn't mean they could afford to go to university. Public universities in Afghanistan are free, but if you're coming from a poor family, you can't afford to get to Kabul from this remote province. We went in a car, but they would have to go by bus. They couldn't afford books, supplies. So we started what we called the University Scholarship Program. And it's really a stipend. So started out at $40 a month during the school year, and then we raised it to $50. So this allowed them to buy food, school supplies, allowed them to get to their university and then back home. And just that little bit each month made a huge difference about whether a girl or boy could go to university. And we had about 36 students who were receiving this stipend. We also later created what we called school kids. And we were finding some of the girls, younger girls who attended the adult women literacy program, really then wanted to go back into the regular school. They felt confident and they were working really hard, but they came from the poorest of the poor families. And so the school kid had a school uniform, a backpack, and school supplies, and that made it possible for them to attend a regular school. This is in Ghazni. This is a typical housing area where our students and teachers would live. By the way, we employed 25 teachers during our time with the 3 learning centers. So a highlight really of the trip was the people, and it was really great to see the kids. This was at an orphanage in Ghazni province. I had a great time there. I know Hamira did too. The kids were really special, but even back then, there was so much poverty. So many of these kids actually aren't orphans, but their parents and families can't afford to take care of them. But their smiles were great and they were so happy to see us, and that was wonderful. But to juxtapose that with these real cute kids at a private preschool in Kabul, they're dressed in clothes that would fit in here in the Bay Area, really cute. So there was always that have and have nots. And as we go into where we are right now in Afghanistan, there's a lot more have-nots.
So you have all probably seen that in August of 2021, the Afghan government collapsed, and now the ruling government is the Taliban that have come into power. Since the Taliban have taken over, girls are not able to attend secondary schools. Women are not able to work unless if they're in very specific roles that men cannot do their jobs. So, but other than that, I would say a large majority of women who were working before are not working. In the past couple of years, there's been extensive drought, which has affected farming and the provincial areas. Also, shortly after the government collapse and the Taliban takeover, the United States put sanctions on the Taliban government, and they froze $7.5 billion Afghan people's assets, which was in a bank in New York. So what that basically means is that when in the years that the US occupied Afghanistan, the banking system was set up where most of the country's reserves were in a bank in New York. So it would not fall in the wrong hands. But since the United States does not recognize the Taliban government, they decide to freeze these $7.5 billion funds of the government. But that includes salaries of government workers, people's bank deposits. So for example, some of the people that we know, their life savings were in the bank and they can't withdraw that money, or there are people who have not been paid their salary for 6 months because the government doesn't have any funds. So the US is holding on to the Afghan funds has brought on an economic collapse in the country. There's currently major human rights, collapse of, sorry, I'm having a hard time talking about the subject. It's very upsetting for me. But there's hunger, starvation, children who are dying of malnutrition. And it's specifically because of this economic collapse. And also 2 weeks ago, President Biden announced that of the $7.5 billion that they had frozen, they're actually going to allocate half of that, which is around $3 billion, to be considered for the 9/11 victims' families as a way to compensate them for their losses. So now the $7.5 billion that the Afghans had is cut in half, and that still hasn't brought into the country. And when the US froze these funds, the rest of the world stopped supporting Afghanistan as well. So we're very disheartened about the situation and what has brought on the economic collapse. Since our schools are closed, we have really turned our attention to supporting our community during this time of starvation and collapse of the society. Next slide. First, in January, we sent funds to our teachers because we knew that they had not been paid a regular salary. So we went ahead and gave them some extra funds based on some of the donations that we had received. After that, we subsidized purchase of flour and oil for 56 very poor families in our community. And these are some of the women who had come and collected. And one of the things that we were thinking is, oh, these are the poorest of the poor. They really need this flour and oil. So here in this photo, you see there's a tank of oil and flour, a bag of flour. But what we realized is that some families who are, basically professionals, they worked in the Ministry of Women's Affairs, or the husband was the police or such, even they're coming and asking for this handout, that because the government is not able to pay their salaries, they're in a dire situation where their kids go hungry. Next slide, please. So we were really heartened by the fact that $40 can give a bag of rice and a tank of oil to a family, which is really helpful because Afghans eat a lot of bread. So you can make dough and make bread from this. And the oil can be used to, cook potatoes, or even put a little bit in the bread to make it a little bit nutritious, because there are some families that are just having tea and bread all day for all 3 meals. Next slide. So we were really happy 2 weeks ago with a very generous donation that we received from one of our longtime supporters. We were able to provide flour and oil for an additional 76 families. And now the word is out on the street. So now 200 families are waiting for us to provide flour and oil for them. And we are hoping that through our fundraiser tonight and some additional donations that's coming in, that we will be able to feed those families. And it will take around $9,000 to provide that support. And one of the heartbreaking things is for us is that a lot of these families that we're helping have been part of our community all these years, and they never asked for handouts. They were not in this kind of situation, but here, people are just fighting for a little bit of flour and oil. But at the same time, we're really, really glad that the relatives of the director of our school is able to organize this distribution, and we can work with them, and we have found a way to get funds into the country. Next slide. So one thing that we do know is that the Afghan people are devastated by the return of the Taliban, but at the same time, they would like to have peace, to have their children go to school, to continue participating in the world in a civil way. And we hope the same. We hope that there is going to be stability in Afghanistan. And if it is going to be the Taliban that are going to stay, then we need to, as the world, cooperate, because, freezing funds that belong to the Afghan people only hurts the Afghan people. It does not hurt the Taliban government. And we're so thankful to our community of donors here who generously supported us. We're really thankful to you for recognizing the situation there and highlighting us as an organization to partner with. And we're hoping that, within a year, things will settle and we will have smiling kids like these ones again to showcase, as opposed to what is happening in Afghanistan. So we ask for all your prayers and your help, and we thank you for giving us the time to talk to you tonight. And this is the end of our presentation.
Well, thank you, Hamida and John. Thank you. Your remarks are really very powerful and also very poignant, and really touch the heart. And so, at this point, I think it'd be really good to open up the conversation and invite others in the room to see what kinds of questions perhaps they might have. I know Sylvia has one to start us off, and then we'll ask everyone to raise your hand. You know how to do that. Go down to reactions and just sort of raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, and we will call on you. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you so much for your presentation. I can feel how difficult it is and how amazing the work that you have done connecting with the people right there. One question is, what are some ways that we can help the Afghan people? What are some things we can?
John, do you want me to take that? Okay. So as far as what you could do to help stay informed, really, I would love for everyone to, if you see an article about Afghanistan, read it. And one of the things that we can all individually do, like for example, with the frozen funds, I mean, we're still holding on to the Afghan people's money. Call your representatives, ask them to, speak up in whatever committees they're in, that you don't support this and that we don't support taking the $3.5 billion of Afghan assets for the 9/11 victims' families, who are very deserving of some kind of repatriation. But the Afghan people had nothing to do with 9/11. It is not, if anything, they have suffered greatly. So that is something that I think would be immensely helpful. As far as the Afghans that are coming to the US, because we didn't really address the number of Afghans that are coming to the United States, there is a great need of support that is going to come for people who are resettling in the United States. I'm not really sure if people are resettling in the Santa Cruz area. However, Santa Cruz, all of the Bay Area, San Francisco, it's so expensive that they don't really resettle the refugees here. However, there are some. One of the things that I have done is on my website, I've created a page called Action for Afghans. And in there is a list of different organizations that you can contact. And I'm dropping that in the chat.
Yes.
There you go. Sorry, you're
No,
so the Action for Afghans basically gives you, a list of different organizations, like for example, Afghan Coalition in Fremont, which has been active in supporting the Afghan community for the past 20 years, is doing a lot of work to resettle refugees. There's the Islamic Relief Fund, which is a very reputable organization that has been working in Afghanistan and is also working with refugees here. You can, volunteer with them. You can send them donations, but please send us the donations instead to Afghan friends. There's also an organization that has received a lot of Afghan refugees in Sacramento, opening doors. So some of the things with helping refugees hands-on, unless if there are some in your community, it's a little bit harder, because you could maybe support a family by, showing them where the DMV is, how you register your class. But if you don't have Afghans in your community, that's a little bit harder. But I'm personally helping one Afghan woman who has resettled here, and 4 sisters, with like connecting them to employers, finding organizations that helps them, with job training and things like that. So that's like what I'm doing for the resettled Afghans. But most of my focus is on Afghanistan. But if you want to look at the action page on my website, there I have some good ideas there for what you can do here for the resettled refugees.
I would add one more thing. If your friends ask you what you did last night, tomorrow, talk about Afghanistan. It's not covered as much as it should be. And with the horrific situation in Ukraine, it's going to be pushed back. I think it was last week, I very excitedly forwarded an article from the San Jose Mercury News to Humaira, because I'm like, oh, they have an editorial about the money, the Afghan money that President Biden said half would go to the 9/11 families. So every now and then, but there just isn't enough. So spread the word about what's going on.
Thank you. Thank you for some of those very grounded sort of ways in which we can work one-on-one or continue to work in other organizations. I know I'm in Oregon, as I think I mentioned to you, I'm in Portland, and there actually is quite a large settlement of Afghans here. I think Catholic Charities may be one of the organizations sort of sponsoring that, but you brought up some really good ways in which, for example, on a one-on-one, one could be helpful in making somebody feel welcome and also bridging relationships. So thank you. Okay. Anyone? Yes.
We have Rose's hand.
Okay, Rose. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And thank you, Humaira and John, very much for your dedication and continued support. I was extremely struck by the US government's freezing of assets.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you can provide a little more specific direction in addition to contacting my congressman, but any other efforts one might make that can be a little more impactful. I've worked in other industries where when they're trying to reject a bill or pass a Congress bill, there's a recommendation of a letter and you can gather signatures. And can you offer any guidance in that way? And we have our newsletter coming up. So this, will be hopefully a strong part of it to target a wider audience than we have here this evening. Thank you.
Do you want to talk about that effort you're working on?
Yeah, so I think contacting your representatives will be helpful because it is important that they hear from all kinds of people and all different locations, because the Afghan community is sort of centered in the East Bay and then Virginia and New York. But then I think if they hear from a variety of different places, it will be more impactful. There is a petition going around. And while we're talking, I'll look for that and drop that in the chat. But that is basically the two things that I have worked on. There are some efforts within the Afghan diaspora. For example, from one of the organizations, some of the local DC Afghan residents went and spoke in front of the Capitol, and people are making efforts to raise this issue. And then I also know from watching Afghan news that the Taliban government are trying to talk through the regular channels to explain, the fact that this is a problem for the Afghan people. So I'm not sure. I don't know enough about politics to know if this is a done deal or not, or it can be reversed. But it's certainly something that is very unconscionable and also inhumane, to be honest with you, to take monies that don't belong to you and then reallocate it for something else. It just doesn't make any sense. But if John has something else to add, and that's the other thing, is raise this issue because people don't know about it. I mean, I keep talking, whoever passed me by on the street, I tell them about it, but I'm just one person. I mean, I know a lot in the Afghan community, we are all fully aware of it. And, people like John who are involved, but it seems like a lot of people don't know about this. And that is what is really disconcerting to me.
So before I forget, Rose, I want to thank you for your help in preparing for tonight. It was good working with you before tonight. So I've had good luck calling my Congresswoman's office. I'm in San Mateo. My Congresswoman is Jackie Spear, and I don't think they get as many calls about Afghanistan as for example, Ro Khanna, who has Fremont as well as other parts of the South Bay. Much to my surprise, when I called about the bringing Afghans here and that whole process, the office actually called me back 2 days later. And I was dumbfounded, and I almost didn't answer the call because there was no caller ID, just a phone number. I'm really glad I answered and was really pleased that the person I had spoken with came back with more information and said that she would continue to update me. So do reach out. The office has to log every call they receive and what it's about. And so make it of interest and a priority to your local congressperson.
Well, hi, Hamar and John, thank you. I wanted to say something in reference to what we were just talking about. The history of the United States is very, very, they know how to take what doesn't belong to them. Land, money, people's lives. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I'm really glad to have some awareness of that this happened. It's not surprising. And yet, again, it is something that we've done. But my question is about the last few years have really brought people to their feet in regards to stepping up and owning up around issues around social justice and what's going on in the world. And particularly women, we will rise for freedom. So my question is about, can you speak a little about how the Afghan women have been taking this on and advocating for themselves?
I'll start. So we've referenced the director of our programs. We call her Zahn for protection for her family. What a strong woman. She ran underground schools for girls during the first Taliban period, and then later became an education leader in Ghazni province. She ran for parliament. The Afghan government had a goal of 50% of parliament being made up of women. Women went to school. They expected to have a career as well as a family. We've seen women demonstrate after this most recent Taliban takeover, very bravely protesting, saying that they won't go back to oppression under Taliban rule. So, but we have, the average age in Afghanistan is really young. So there's a lot of women and men who didn't experience the first Taliban period. And so their expectation was that they'd have a career, a family, an education. So I'm hoping that they'll be strong, but it is a really scary time in Afghanistan for women. The Taliban control the streets, and right now the women aren't working, and if they are working, they're not getting paid. The men aren't getting paid. I think right now it's a matter of survival for those people. As Humaira said earlier, we're talking about families that lived a really comfortable life and now are, food insecure. I think it's really important for women and men outside of Afghanistan to really speak up for them, for the women and girls.
I thank you, John. That was really thorough. One of the things I want to say is that it seems that we are really hearing just part of the news here in the United States. And I know we have so many things of our own that we're facing currently, with the laws passing in Texas to recovery from COVID and so many things, not to mention the social justice issue and the oppression of Black lives and so many things. So that's why we're so thankful to all of you for taking the time to come and listen to us share even further bad news with you. But I want to say that the Afghan women have been incredibly brave. There are protests every day, and they have learned how to protest very effectively, because I've actually, since the takeover of the Taliban, every day I watch the Afghan news. And what I'm learning is that the women use WhatsApp and social media to to make a plan for where they're going to gather, and they all travel as one or two people, not in groups, because they know the Taliban are going to stop them. And once they have a mass of people, then they have their phones on the whole time, because the Taliban will not beat them or harass them or shoot them if they catch everything on television or on camera. So that is how they've been proceeding. And then when that started getting curtailed, then they started meeting indoors and reading poetry and supporting each other that way and motivating. Unfortunately, in the past 4 weeks, 4 very vocal female activists, all very young, under 30, have gone missing, and nobody has any idea where they are. And the Taliban government are pretending like, they went on holiday. They keep saying, oh, they probably just went somewhere. So that has been really scary and intimidating for a lot of the women. But what I'm so incredibly heartened by is that these young girls, these women are not giving up. There's so many outspoken, like international advocates of Afghan women who have been speaking up in the United States. They were in Oslo when the meeting with the Taliban were happening. They're, speaking through YouTube, social media, tweeting. But one thing that has been a bit disheartening for us is that really the feminist organizations have not really come out and said much. The United Nations or the World Bank, no one has really come out and said to the US, release the Afghan people's money. There have been very few European voices, and that is kind of surprising. As you mentioned, Bhavananda, that it's not surprising that the US is doing this, but I am surprised that the rest of the world has kept quiet about it.
Can I
Thank you for your question.
May I say one more thing as well? You know, we in this country have faced so many wars, and there's so much going on, as you said, and we know. But when something happens in Afghanistan, which did, we are so affected by that. The whole climate in this country with people, we're so unsettled because we feel that we care about our sisters and brothers. So I just wanted to acknowledge that no matter what's going on in this country, and there's always something going on in this country, but when something happens somewhere else, like Afghanistan, we are hit right in our hearts as well. So thank you.
Well, I think that's where that's where the name of your organization means so much, is the Center for World Network, right? I mean, we're all connected. It's not, you know, Afghanistan, you know, I mean, we're all women, and men, you know, we're all connected in so many ways. Our humanity brings us together. So thank you for uplifting that.
Thank you for that, Humaida. Certainly, you know, whenever anyone is dehumanized on this planet, we're all dehumanized, right? And I think, you know, we're just seeing it explode in so many places right now. It's almost hard to keep up. But I think it's really important to have these kinds of dialogues. We may be small, but we're mighty, you know, and certainly, you know, I was curious about the international community, and in part thinking about international, you know, NGOs, or, you know, what role have they been able to continue to play in Afghanistan, if any at all? I mean, they're somewhat, little bit semi-autonomous from sort of the governmental organizations. So do you have any awareness or understanding of what role they have played or are playing in this whole conversation about not only the monies, but their ability to provide needed services in Afghanistan?
John, do you want to say something, or should I?
There are some organizations working. Some organizations that have dealt with food have been trying to raise that issue, and I wish it was reaching more people, because we're looking at a huge part of the population facing malnutrition, definitely food insecurity, but in many cases death. But they are bringing in aid, but it's not nearly enough. There are some medical NGOs that have been supporting the hospitals and clinics, but it's not nearly enough, and very few of the medical staff were receiving salaries. So and it's not just staff, but there aren't medications, equipment, things that we certainly learned about in the past couple of years, things like oxygen, but it's just a huge shortage. And the aid that's been turned back on and that is being allowed in is just a fraction of the funding that Afghanistan received from the United States and the rest of the world.
And additionally, so when the US originally froze the Afghan people's funds, many organizations and countries felt there was a signal to them to not help the Afghans, and they worried that if they did help, that the US would reprimand them. So a lot of aid organizations froze their work as well, and they have only really started just in the past few months. So that kind of doubled down on setting the Afghan economy towards a collapse. But there's this in Sweden, I can't remember, it's a Swedish funds or something. They've continued their help, and they're actually the ones who really actively called out the US government for freezing Afghan people's funds. The World Food Program. And one of the things that's really important to understand is that when the Taliban collapsed, everybody left Afghanistan. You know, of course, all the US staff, United Nations, World Food Program, everything. So all these organizations that had networks of people who were doing the aid work before, there was a total vacuum in the country. It's just like I said, the past 3 months that people have slowly started going back and reestablishing their offices. And a lot of those offices used Afghan nationals to do their work, but a lot of those Afghan nationals had to escape because they were worried that. So it's kind of a, you know, like a house of cards that just kind of collapsed because there was just a vacuum. So that is what is also affecting the aid supply getting there. So I think the intention is there. But like, for example, the United Nations, UNAMA, the United Nations Afghanistan mission, completely shut down. So then they had to restart all over, and half of their employees left the country and half are in hiding. They're afraid to come out. They were basically Afghan nationals. So that's also playing a big part in slowing down the aid that's needed.
Thank you. That's sobering news. Bhavananda, do you see any other questions or any hands up?
I do not.
You do not. Okay.
See any other hands.
Any hands? All
But
right.
there was, there might, how about maybe some books and movies about Afghanistan that might be informative or bring more awareness to the people, the culture, what's going on, everything, all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to share. I have created an extensive list of books and movies and documentaries and such. Sylvia, did I give you a link to that? Oh, there it is. So the link is there. And I also have some books from neighboring countries, also from the Islamic world. But they're categorized by fiction, nonfiction, film, documentary. So you can go at it. I do want to plug that currently Netflix is showing a short documentary that is been nominated for an Academy Award, and it was made in Afghanistan. It's called 3 Songs for Benazir. I'm gonna write the name. So if you have Netflix, you can watch this for free. It's only 20 minutes long, and it's really beautiful short documentary, and we'll keep our fingers crossed that it's going to be made into to win an Academy Award. There's also another movie called Flee, Flee. This is actually a Danish film, and this was nominated for Best Documentary, Best Animated Film, and Best.
Is it best foreign language film?
So for three nominations, it's not really available widely right now on any, like, you know, on Amazon Prime or something, but I think it's going to be very soon. And I think that this crowd who's so educated and interested in the world would really enjoy that film as well. But 3 Songs for Benazir. Oh, I didn't put it. 3 Songs for Benazir is available right now on Netflix.
And Humaida, you also have a video, don't you, or a YouTube video that you did as well?
Yes, yes, yes. So I have a YouTube channel which has videos about Afghan culture and Afghan food. I show you step by step how to make some of yummy Afghan dishes, but also, and I'll put a link for that here. The Afghan New Year holiday is going to be at the end of March. And this might be interesting to you, Celia, if there are any Afghans in your community. So the holiday is called Nowruz, and we make a special dry fruit compote for that. Maybe some people want to impress their new Afghan neighbors and make some the haftarah there. You can make cookies, you can make Afghan rice. I also have video which is entitled 100-Year History of Afghan Women. So the 16 minutes I do I cover what has happened to Afghan women in the past 100 years, and you'll be surprised that it was not always terrible. So check that out. I'll let John say a thing or two about Afghan music and books, his favorite. I'll find that the link to my YouTube channel.
I have another question, if I may. It's
Absolutely.
Rose. Thank you. Do you have a list of editorials that speak to the government's freeze of their assets? People like to look at news facts, something, like wonderful to have the list of books and films, but related to that.
I will, so like.
Different editorials, perhaps.
I shared, it was an editorial that was republished by the Sounds Like Merck. I'll get that and I'll find some others and I will email them to Sylvia.
No, email. I guess email to myself and Rose.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
please.
And
Thank you.
if you wouldn't mind including that petition and any of the resources you meant, I tried copying them, but I'm sort of on screen and I don't want to go off. Because we're going to do a follow-up article in the network, and it would be good to perhaps hone in on some of the key points you raised this evening about the issues around the budget. And the resources and that kind of thing, so that we can kind of share that out as another phase, sort of reporting on where we are with the fundraiser. We're going to keep the account open for a little bit longer, so that whatever comes in, you will receive post whatever we give you this time. And hopefully we'll keep the conversation alive. And certainly it's something that you can also feel free to take and share out in your own circles. And so we'll be in touch about it, because I certainly wouldn't put anything out without running it by you first. So
That's great. I appreciate that you want to do it.
And just for Rose, this has been written about in New York Times and the Washington Post and such, but I'm sure John will find the links and send it to you, to Celia and Sylvia. But it's not something that was not written about in prominent publications. It's just that it was written once somewhere and then people forgot about it.
Right, exactly. And to be able to have that, so sure. Because I had not heard of it, just because I didn't read that, but people can look and even revisit, remind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I did put the link to my YouTube channel if you are interested in learning about Afghan culture, Afghan women, Afghan food, Afghan New Year. There are a bunch of different videos there.
Okay, somebody copy that for me.
So back to the culture. So if any of you like to travel and like Broadway, the Kite Runner will be opening on Broadway this summer. So Humaira is the cultural consultant again for this play. Which is super exciting. And I saw it in San Jose with Humaira, went to the opening with her, which was very nice. And so it was so nice to see it there, but to see it on Broadway, which I hope will remind people that Afghanistan is still there and is in and needs support and needs to have people pay attention to what's happening. But yeah, book your trips to New York.
I like that. Okay, well, thank you. This has been a really wonderful conversation and exchange, and hopefully will not be the last. And we'll look forward to putting all those little pieces together and seeing what we can continue to share out with our community. I would like, before we close, I have the honor and privilege to be reading one of Danusha Lamaris's poems, and many of you know Danusha. And for you and Amara, I wanted to let you know that Danusha is a member of our community. She's a local poet, well, not just local, she's an international poet, but she has, where do I have her description? She was the poet laureate for Santa Cruz in 2018 and 20. Okay, she wrote the poem that I'm going to read in 2014, and I'm saying that very distinctly because it was you know, as poets do, as artists do, they're visionaries without always knowing it or are not knowing it, and there are things in that poem that resonate with what's happening today in Afghanistan. So with no further ado, I will read Inshallah by Danusha Lamaris. I don't know when it slipped into my speech, that soft word meaning, if God wills it. Inshallah, I will see you next summer. The baby will come in spring, inshallah. Inshallah, this year we will have enough rain. So many plans I've laid have unraveled easily as braids beneath my mother's quick fingers. Every language must have a word for this, a word our grandmothers uttered under their breath as they pinned the whites, soaked in lemon, hung them to dry in the sun, or peeled potatoes, dropping the discarded skins into a bowl. Our sons will return next month, inshallah. Inshallah, this war will end soon. Inshallah, the rice will be enough to last through winter. How lightly we learn to hold hope, as if it were an animal that could turn around and bite your hand. And still, we carry it the way a mother would, carefully, from one day to the next. So, inshallah, thank you for coming and being with us here tonight, this evening, and sharing. And giving us a greater sense of connection with you, Humaida and John and the Afghan community here and there. And I also want to thank everybody here. We have a lot of members of the steering committee who happen to be here tonight. I know many of you've heard us talking about everybody, but many have contributed to make this a success. And I certainly want to acknowledge the steering committee members who contributed. And as you know, we're working to raise monies to be able to match up to at least $1,000, but who knows, we can go way beyond that, and we're open to that. And everyone is able to donate through our website at the donate button using the AFN drop down or mailing checks to our PO box. And we will be continuing to receive that money. And at some point soon, Marianne will be in touch and get back to you with what we've raised, and we'll leave the lines open as we write the next article for the next quarter and continue our ongoing relationship. So I want to thank you both for your time, your kindness, and willingness to come and share and be with us here tonight.
Thank you so much to everyone for being here on this Monday night and for your compassion and your kind words. And I already see Teresa's already written the letters and sent them, or she took the letters and sent them to her representatives as we were talking. I put in a link in the chat if anybody wants to sign the petition or send letters that are pre-written so you don't have to come up with the verbiage. But clearly you're a really action-oriented community with compassion, empathy, and so much love for the world. And we're so really grateful that you have reached out to us, and we will be connected.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. And I just will let you know, I'd like to get some money to you as quickly as possible. And then as other monies come in, I will be happy to write as many checks and forward them as the money continues to come in. But it sounds like you can use it right now
Yes.
with
We can, thank you.
going on with the family. So if you could leave me maybe a phone number to call you so I can get an address, I can even get something to you this week that you can then use right away.
Okay,
John, you're gonna put that in?
yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Miriam, thank you so much for managing all that and receiving it on our behalf. So
It's our pleasure. It's what we do.
thank you.
That's great. And thank you again for choosing us and opening your hearts to the plight of the Afghan people.
Well, good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Mhm.